My name is Emily Harrison. I was 33 years old when my mother turned my birthday dinner into a public execution. Not with a knife, not with blood, with a silver pen, a sealed folder, and one sentence that showed me exactly how much I was worth to the people sitting around that table. Sign it, Emily. Tonight. The room fell silent so quickly I could hear the ice crack inside someone's glass. I looked at the document in front of me. It was thick, filled with legal language, and already marked with little yellow tabs where my signature was supposed to go. I hadn't been allowed to read it. I hadn't been allowed to ask questions. I was simply expected to obey, smile, and pretend this was love. "What is it?" I asked. My mother's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped low enough to cut. "It protects the family." That was when I knew it didn't protect me. I reached for the first page, but she slapped her palm down over it. Not hard enough to leave a bruise. Just hard enough to humiliate me in front of everyone. "You have always been difficult," she said. "Always ungrateful. Always convinced you were smarter than the rest of us." I looked around the table waiting for just one person to speak up. Nobody did. Then she stood, pointed toward the front door, and screamed, "Get out!" The whole family backed her. No one blinked. No one followed me. And I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply picked up my coat, left my untouched birthday cake behind, and walked out knowing one terrifying thing. She had chosen that night because she believed I had nowhere else to go. Before I tell you what she said next, and what happened after I walked out, tell me what time it is, where you are right now, and where you're watching from. I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. I sat in my car outside the gates for exactly 7 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock change from 9:42 to 9:49, while the house behind me glowed as if nothing had happened. Through the windows, I could still see figures moving around the dining room. People were probably whispering. Maybe someone was laughing nervously. Maybe someone was already clearing the cake off the table, erasing me like a stain. The old Emily would have driven to a hotel and replayed every insult until sunrise. The old Emily would have written a long message asking why my own mother hated me so much. But the woman sitting in that car had spent years preparing for one night she had never wanted to believe would come. I was not broke. I was not helpless. And I was not the confused daughter they thought they could corner. For 11 years, I had worked as a forensic maritime appraiser, the kind of specialist insurance companies called when yachts disappeared, cargo ships burned, docks collapsed, and billionaires lied about what their assets were worth. I knew how to trace ownership through shell companies. I knew how to read contracts designed to trap people. And 3 months earlier, I had sold my minority stake in a marine risk software company I had quietly helped build under a different holding name. My family thought I had a strange little consulting job. They had no idea my payout had cleared into escrow 2 days before my birthday. They also had no idea the document my mother wanted me to sign wasn't a birthday surprise. It was a financial ambush. At 9:52, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the closing attorney for Ravenwick Island Estate, a private island off the coast of Maine, with a stone castle built by a shipping magnate in the 1920s. I had toured it 6 weeks earlier under an anonymous buyer profile, partly as an investment and partly as a dare to myself. The estate had originally been listed for $94 million, then reduced to $87 million after a foreign buyer's deal fell through. I had negotiated hard, paid for inspections, and kept the purchase hidden because I wanted one place in the world that had never belonged to my mother. The email read, "Funds verified. Seller will execute final transfer at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because the timing felt almost cruel. My mother had just thrown me out of a house where every wall reminded me I was unwanted. The next morning, I would own an island castle outright, paid in full, with no mortgage, no family trust controlled by her, and no permission required. That night, I didn't drive to a hotel. I drove to a small office I kept near the harbor, unlocked a filing cabinet, and pulled out the copies I had made months earlier. Old company records, my father's death certificate, my mother's financial disclosures, and a sealed envelope my late father's former assistant had mailed to me with a note that read, "Open this only when your mother asks you to sign something." I had been too afraid to open it before. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a single flash drive, a photograph of my father holding me as a child, and a handwritten line I immediately recognized from the birthday cards he used to write. "Emily, if she tries to take your name, your work, or your inheritance, do not negotiate. Run the numbers, then run the truth." That was the first time I understood my mother hadn't thrown me out because I was worthless. She had thrown me out because I was the last thing standing between her and everything she had stolen. The next morning, I wore the same black dress from my birthday dinner to the closing. I didn't change because I wanted to remember exactly who they thought they had thrown away. The dress still carried the faint scent of candle smoke, expensive perfume, and humiliation. Every time I looked down at the sleeves, I remembered my mother's finger pointing toward the door. Every time I felt the fabric against my skin, I heard the silence of the people who had watched me leave. But instead of making me weak, it sharpened me. At 8:17, I walked into a glass conference room overlooking the harbor in Portland, Maine. The seller's attorney looked surprised when I introduced myself. People always expected someone older, colder, probably male. When $87 million was on the table, they didn't expect a woman with no entourage, no husband at her side, no family representative, and no nervous explanation for why she was there. I placed my identification on the table, sat down, and signed each page slowly, not dramatically, not with trembling hands, just carefully, the way I had learned to sign reports that could determine whether a company survived or collapsed. At 8:46, the final wire confirmation came through. At 8:51, the deed was officially recorded. At 8:54, Ravenwick Island Estate became mine. The attorney slid the final folder toward me and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Harrison." For a moment, the room became too quiet. I had heard my last name used as a warning, a label, a burden, and a weapon. That morning, for the first time, it sounded like ownership. The castle sat on a black rock island 12 minutes by boat from the mainland. It had a private dock, a weather station, 6 guest cottages, a lighthouse, a boathouse, underground storage tunnels, and a main residence built from granite so dark it looked blue beneath storm clouds. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It wasn't a fantasy purchase made out of heartbreak. It was a fortress, a business asset, a retreat center waiting to happen, and, most importantly, a legal address no one in my family controlled. When I stepped onto the dock, the estate manager was waiting for me. His name was Elias Grant, 61, a former Coast Guard officer with quiet eyes, a heavy wool coat, and the kind of posture that made it seem as though even storms asked his permission before crossing the water. He handed me the keys with both hands. "Welcome home, Miss Harrison." No one had ever said those words to me without making them sound conditional. I almost answered, but my phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my older brother called. Then my cousin. Then a private number. By noon, I had 32 missed calls, 11 voicemails, and 1 text from my mother. "You embarrassed me last night. Come home before this becomes worse." Not, "Are you safe?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not even, "Where are you?" Just, "Come home before this becomes worse." I showed Elias the message because I needed one witness to prove I wasn't imagining the cruelty. He read it once, then handed the phone back. People who use home as a leash hate it when you learn how to unlock doors. That was the first time I trusted him. Over the next few days, I learned the island's rhythms. The generator system needed upgrades. The old greenhouse had cracked glass. The lighthouse hadn't been used for tours in years. The cottages could become artist residencies, legal retreats, or maybe a summer program for women rebuilding after financial abuse. Every room gave me an idea. Every locked cabinet made me wonder what I had been too afraid to open in my own life. But peace didn't arrive cleanly. It came in fragments between threats. My mother began sending messages through relatives, each one disguised as concern. "You're being impulsive? You can't manage a property like that. Everyone is worried about your mental state." Those phrases weren't random. They were legal language. She was building a story that I was unstable. By the third night, one cousin sent me a voice message saying my mother was considering her options because my behavior had become alarming. I listened to it twice, then forwarded it to my attorney's secure inbox without replying. That was when I realized the document she had tried to force me to sign probably would have given her authority over my assets. Maybe even my medical decisions. Maybe even the proceeds from my company. The question that kept me awake wasn't why she wanted control. It was how long she had been planning it. On the fourth night, as rain battered the castle windows, Elias knocked on the library door and handed me a maintenance binder from the previous owners. "I found something behind a false panel in the archive room," he said. Inside the binder was a property map. Tucked behind it was a copy of an old visitor log. One name appeared 3 times over 7 years. My mother's. She had been to Ravenwick Island before. Long before I bought it. Long before I even knew it existed. Suddenly, my safe place didn't feel random anymore. It felt like a trap someone had failed to close before I stepped inside. I stared at my mother's signature in the visitor log until the ink seemed to move. Victoria Harrison. Her handwriting was unmistakable, all sharp angles and perfect pressure, as though even paper should fear disappointing her. The first visit had been 15 years earlier, 2 months after my father died. The second had been 8 years ago, around the time I was pushed out of the family's charitable foundation for not fitting the public image. The third visit had been last winter, 3 weeks before I received a mysterious anonymous tip that Ravenwick Island might be undervalued. My stomach turned cold. I had thought I found the island. Now I wondered if the island had been placed in my path. Was I the buyer? Or had someone been guiding me toward a battlefield my father had prepared years before I understood the war? Elias helped me search the archive room. Behind old ledgers, rusted keys, cracked leather trunks, and mold-scented shipping maps, we found a locked metal document case marked with the name of the original shipping family. The key was taped beneath a drawer, almost too obvious, as if someone wanted it found by the right person but missed by anyone in a hurry. My mother was always in a hurry when something didn't belong to her. Inside were copies of meeting notes, wire records, photographs, and a letter addressed to my father. The letter was from a man named Charles Whitfield, an estate attorney who had represented several old New England families. It explained that my father had hired him to create an independent trust for me, separate from my mother, funded through maritime investments my father had made before his death. The trust was designed to release in stages. Education at 21, seed capital at 25, full access at 35, or earlier if my mother attempted to claim legal control over me. I was 34. 1 year away. Unless last night counted as an attempt. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. My father had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to build a legal shield for a daughter who didn't even know she needed one. Enough to create a trap for the woman who had spent years pretending to be the grieving widow. Inside the document case, we found something even worse. Copies of forged board meeting minutes from my father's company, insurance settlement transfers, altered beneficiary paperwork, and handwritten notes linking my mother to a pattern of stripping assets after my father's death. She hadn't just been controlling, she had been stealing. From the estate, from the foundation, possibly from me. The discovery made the room feel smaller. All those years she had called my questions disrespectful. All those years she had told me I was too suspicious, too cold, too independent. Maybe I had never been difficult. Maybe I had simply been standing too close to the truth. I called Nora Whitfield, the granddaughter of the attorney who had written the letter and now a partner at his old firm. She answered on the second ring. When I told her my name, she was silent for several seconds. Then she said, "I wondered when you would call." Those 5 words opened a door I could never close again. Nora flew to Maine the next morning with 2 bankers and a forensic accountant. We spread the documents across the castle's long dining table. It looked like a war room because it was one. Nora explained that my father's trust had been buried beneath layers of protective clauses after he died suddenly in a boating accident. My mother had tried to challenge it privately, failed, and then spent years making sure I never learned enough to trigger it. The contract at my birthday dinner had been her final shortcut. If I had signed it, she could have argued that I had voluntarily assigned my financial authority to her family office. She wouldn't have needed to steal the proceeds from my company. I would have handed them to her myself. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me very still. There is a kind of anger that screams, and there is a kind that becomes math. Mine became math. We calculated missing funds. We matched dates. We reviewed board signatures. We compared old scanned documents with the originals kept in the island archive. We found charitable donations sent out under children's hospital names that returned through consulting invoices to companies tied to my mother's closest allies. We found payments labeled legacy preservation that had nothing to do with preserving anything except her lifestyle. We found an invoice from a private investigator dated 8 years earlier with my name on it. My mother hadn't just been watching my money, she had been watching me. By midnight, Nora looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright. "Emily," she said, "this isn't just family misconduct, this is fraud." I looked toward the windows, where the ocean crashed against the rocks below. For years, my mother had trained the family to see me as dramatic, unstable, and ungrateful. She had made my emotions the problem so no one would examine her actions. But what do you call a daughter who stops asking for love and starts asking for evidence? Dangerous. That was what I became. Before we left the dining room, Nora set one folder apart from the rest. "There's something else," she said. "Your father's boating accident file was requested twice after his death. Once by the insurance company, once by your mother's private attorney." The air left my lungs. I didn't ask the question out loud because I already knew everyone in the room was thinking it. How far had my mother gone to keep control? And how much of my life had been built on a lie she expected me to inherit without question? My mother made her first official move 6 days after she kicked me out. The petition arrived by courier at Ravenwick Island in a cream-colored envelope with my full name typed in capital letters. Even the paper looked expensive enough to insult me. Inside, her attorneys claimed I was suffering from acute emotional instability, that my purchase of an island estate proved reckless judgment, and that my family was seeking temporary oversight of my finances for my own protection. I read the sentence twice and smiled so calmly that Nora looked concerned. "She thinks the island makes you look irrational," Nora said. "Then we'll make the island make sense," I answered. That afternoon, we released nothing publicly. We didn't rant. We didn't post vague quotes online. We didn't give my mother the satisfaction of watching me defend myself emotionally. Instead, we built a response so precise it could bleed. Nora filed proof that the estate purchase had been planned weeks before the birthday dinner, supported by inspection reports, valuation memos, bank confirmations, tax planning documents, projected operating revenue, and investment notes showing the island could become a profitable retreat and historic preservation property. My forensic accountant produced a clean paper trail for every dollar. My physician submitted a statement confirming that I was competent, healthy, and under no legal incapacity. A former business partner provided a declaration describing me as methodical, risk-aware, and financially conservative to the point of irritation. That line made me laugh for the first time in days. Then we attached the one thing my mother didn't know we had: the birthday dinner audio. I hadn't recorded it on purpose. My phone had been on the table because I was expecting a call from the closing attorney, and my voice memo app had been left open after recording a work note earlier that day. It captured everything: her demand, her refusal to let me read the contract, her scream, the family's silence, the sound of my chair scraping across the floor as I stood to leave. Nora listened to it once, removed her glasses and said, "This changes the temperature." But I didn't want only a legal victory. I wanted the truth to have witnesses. So we invited the Foundation's board of directors, 2 journalists who specialized in nonprofit fraud, and several family members to a private clarification meeting in a hotel conference room in Boston. The invitation was written politely enough that my mother couldn't refuse without looking guilty. My mother arrived dressed in winter white, pearls around her neck, smiling like a woman attending a charity luncheon. She expected to find a weakened daughter. Instead, she found projector screens, binders, attorneys, auditors, and me standing at the front of the room in a navy suit. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small standing beside her. I didn't feel like her disappointing child. I felt like a witness called by the truth. "This meeting is being recorded," Nora announced. My mother's smile tightened. "Emily, this is unnecessary," she said. "Family matters should remain private." There it was. The sentence people use when privacy really means protection for the guilty. I clicked the remote. The first slide showed the document she had tried to force me to sign. The second showed the clause granting her family office emergency authority over my assets. The third showed the date my company payout had cleared. A murmur rippled through the room. My older brother shifted in his chair. My aunt's face drained of color. Then Nora pressed play on the audio. My mother's voice filled the speakers. "Sign it, Emily, tonight." Then, "Get out." No one moved. No one coughed. No one rescued her from the sound of her own voice. My brother stared at the table. My aunt covered her mouth. My mother looked at me with a hatred so pure it almost felt honest. "You recorded your own family?" she demanded. I looked at her and asked the first question that truly mattered. "Why were you so afraid to let me read the contract?" She didn't answer. So I clicked to the next slide. Wire transfers, forged meeting minutes, foundation money routed through fake consulting agreements, altered beneficiary forms, a private investigator's invoice with my name on it. One of the journalists in the back leaned forward. A board member whispered, "Victoria, what is this?" My mother stood so abruptly that her chair slammed into the wall. "These are stolen documents," she snapped. Nora answered before I could. "No. These are estate records belonging to trusts and entities your office had no authority to alter." Then the final slide appeared. The Ravenwick Island visitor logs. My mother's signature. "You knew about my father's trust," I said. My voice never shook. "You came to the island 3 times because part of the archive was hidden here. You didn't throw me out because I embarrassed you. You threw me out because you were running out of time." Her mask cracked. Not completely, just enough for everyone to see the panic underneath. "You ungrateful little girl," she whispered. But the microphone on the conference table caught every word. The entire room heard it. That was the moment the balance of power shifted. Not because I shouted louder, not because I insulted her in return, but because I had learned the one thing controlling people fear most: a calm victim with receipts. My family began to understand what I had realized in the rain at Ravenwick. My mother hadn't been protecting the family from me. She had been protecting herself from the truth. By sunset, the story was already spreading faster than she could contain it. One journalist described it as a private family dispute with public financial consequences. The other called it what it truly was: a charity fraud scandal tied to an attempt to seize financial control of an adult daughter. Within 24 hours, the foundation's board suspended my mother pending an investigation. 2 directors resigned before they could be questioned. My brother, the same brother who had watched me get thrown out without saying a word, called me from a blocked number. Emily, I didn't know. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike. I remembered him running beside me down the driveway shouting, "Don't look down." But another part of me remembered his eyes at the birthday table, fixed on the floor while our mother pointed toward the door. "You didn't know because not knowing was comfortable," I said. Then I hung up. The hearing on my mother's petition became her first public humiliation. Her attorneys argued that my purchase of Ravenwick Island was irrational. Nora responded with valuation reports proving the estate had been underpriced by nearly 12% because of the seller's liquidity pressure. She also presented my business plan showing that converting the cottages into a high-end retreat center would generate substantial income. Then Nora played the birthday dinner audio. The judge's expression hardened before the recording had even finished. My mother sat perfectly still, but I saw her fingers digging into her palm. When Nora introduced the forged documents, the judge made it clear that criminal charges were beyond the court's authority. Even so, she denied my mother's petition immediately and referred several exhibits to the Attorney General's office for further review. That was the first official crack. The second came 3 days later. My mother's closest ally at the foundation agreed to cooperate. He turned over emails, invoice templates, and one message from my mother that read, "Emily must never gain independent access. She will ask questions her father should have taken to the grave." When Nora showed me those words, something inside me went completely still. My father had died in a boating accident. For years, I had accepted that grief as a closed door. Now the door had a shadow beneath it. I asked Nora whether we could prove my mother had anything to do with his death. She answered carefully, "Not from this, not yet. But we can prove she profited from the aftermath and concealed material estate assets." That had to be enough. For now. Revenge stories make people think satisfaction comes from screaming in someone's face. It doesn't. Real satisfaction comes from watching someone who built a throne out of lies discover that every document has a date, every wire transfer has a destination, and every witness eventually gets tired of being used. My mother lost her seat on the foundation's board. Then her membership at her social club was suspended. Then the hospital wing she had hoped to name after herself postponed the dedication ceremony. Then several bank accounts connected to the disputed entities were frozen. The family house in Newport, the same house she had ordered me to leave, became collateral in a civil recovery action. She called me once after that. I answered because I wanted to hear what a woman like her sounded like without an audience. "You're destroying this family," she said. I stood in the Ravenwick library, looking at my father's photograph resting on the desk. "No," I replied. "I'm documenting who already did." She breathed heavily into the phone. "You think that island makes you untouchable?" "No," I said. "The truth does." For once, she had nothing to say. Her arrest didn't happen the way it does in the movies. There was no dramatic screaming, no officers dragging her down marble steps while cameras flashed. It happened quietly at 7:10 on a Tuesday morning, when investigators served charges related to wire fraud, falsified nonprofit records, and the attempted unlawful control of estate assets. The footage later showed her wearing sunglasses, clutching her coat closed at the neck, refusing to look at the reporters. My brother accepted a plea agreement for his minor role after admitting he had signed documents he never bothered to read. My aunt resigned from every board she served on. Cousins who had once called me unstable began sending apologies that sounded more like legal affidavits than heartfelt letters. I didn't respond to most of them. The strangest part wasn't their betrayal. It was how quickly they wanted forgiveness once loyalty became expensive. 6 months after my mother screamed, "Get out!" I stood in the renovated lighthouse on Ravenwick Island and watched 24 women arrive by ferry for the first retreat hosted by the Harrison Independent Recovery Fund. I had named it Harrison, not for my mother, and not entirely for my father, but for the version of myself who had survived that name long enough to redefine it. The fund offered legal education, financial literacy workshops, emergency planning, and quiet rooms where women could finally say out loud what their families had trained them to hide. Some had been controlled by spouses, some by parents, some by adult children who treated inheritance like a weapon. None of them needed a castle to be free, but for one weekend, they got to stand inside one and be reminded that even locked doors can be opened. Elias ran the island's operations with the calm precision of a ship captain. Nora remained legal counsel for the fund, the cottages filled with teachers, nurses, artists, accountants, and mothers who had forgotten they were allowed to want something for themselves. On the first evening, I told them a softened version of my story, not because I wanted pity, because silence is where manipulation grows teeth. I told them that the night I was thrown out, my family believed humiliation would make me smaller. Instead, it made me clearer. I told them that money didn't save me by itself. Evidence saved me. Preparation saved me. One honest attorney. One steady witness. One unopened envelope. And one decision not to crawl back. Those were the things that saved me. My mother's case continued for months. Eventually, she pleaded guilty to several financial crimes to avoid a longer trial. She lost the Newport house, most of her personal fortune, and the public identity she had spent 30 years polishing. The society pages stopped calling her a philanthropist. The court records called her a defendant. I thought that would make me feel victorious every morning. It didn't. Some mornings, I still miss the mother I wish she had been. I missed a woman who had never existed outside my own hope. That was the final grief. And perhaps the hardest one. Because when someone cruel finally falls, you still have to live with the empty space where love should have been. My brother came to the island once after everything had settled. He looked older, smaller, less certain that charm could still save him. This time, he apologized without excuses. I didn't hug him. I didn't slam the door in his face either. I told him forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip just to make him comfortable. It was a road. And I hadn't yet decided whether he was welcome to walk it with me. He nodded. For the first time, he accepted an answer that didn't benefit him. That felt like progress. On my 35th birthday, I received the final portion of my father's trust. Nora handed me the documents in the same castle dining room where we had once spread out the evidence of my mother's crimes. There was one last letter from my father. It was short. "Emily, I cannot choose your life for you. I can only leave you the tools. Trust your mind, protect your name. Build somewhere safe, but do not become stone to survive stone." I read that last line over and over. Do not become stone to survive stone. So I didn't. I turned Ravenwick into a place with open doors, clear boundaries, and records no one could secretly rewrite. I kept the birthday dress in a glass display case in my office, not because I worshipped pain, because I respected proof. Whenever someone asked why a woman would buy an £87 million island estate the morning after being thrown out by her own mother, I always gave them the simple answer first. Because I could. Then I gave them the real answer. Because sometimes the door they force you through becomes the border between the life they controlled and the life they can never touch again. And if you're listening to this while trapped at a table where everyone expects you to sign away your voice, remember this. Family isn't proven by blood, or by last names, or by holiday photographs, or by the people who applaud while someone powerful humiliates you. Family is proven by protection, by truth, by the courage to stand beside you when silence would be easier. My mother screamed, "Get out!" because she believed exile was a punishment. She never imagined it would become my inheritance.